All right, guys, I'm just getting set up here. There we go. Got it set up and just check on my phone there. All right, all right, all right. We are back for another episode here, guys. And not really sure what happened last night. Actually, I am. My cord to my camera apparently slipped out. So my camera was on battery. It died. Couldn't figure out what was going on. So we lost it midstream. Anyways, for those of you who were wondering, the last thing I was talking about was Carl Jung. And until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life or direct your life, and you will call it fate. And but that's not what we're going to talk about tonight. What we are going to talk about is how to create once and sell to infinity. What do I mean? Well, I'll give you a great example just to start off with. Here's my book. I made it. It's created, right? So I created it once, and I can sell this book one time, 100 times, 10,000, 10 million times. Doesn't matter. I created it once, and I can sell it to infinity. So that's intellectual property, and you don't have to write a book to do this. What I want to actually cover and possibly open your mind to is that there are ways to create wealth. There are ways to do things in life that you get leverage. And what is leverage? Let's go ahead and define it. The delta between your input and your output, right? So if you have a tiny input and a large output, you would have a lot of leverage. This is Archimedes Principle 101. So, of course, if you have, I'll just give a little demonstration here. Of course, if you have this and you've got your, what is this? This is your lever arm and your fulcrum. And so a little bit of leverage right here. If you're lifting something big, well, you've got more leverage. Now, if you're lifting it from here, you don't have much leverage, right? So that's just the delta. That's a simple visualization. Why is this important? Why should you care? Well, because as it turns out, there are all sorts of things in life that you could be doing to get leverage. And when you have leverage, you can have a tiny input and get a massive output. Think Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett was able to get leverage. Now, they didn't use leverage in the market, borrowing and then investing, because you can lose your ass on that really fast. But when you can identify the proper vehicle in life, then you can get leverage. And with a similar amount of work as somebody else, you can get a massively different output or return. So I'm just going to slow down here. I just worked out. Of course, I always do this at night right after working out. So I want to collect my thoughts and make sure I'm clear here in what we're saying. So why this is important? This is important for anybody who's listening, because ultimately, the more that you can get leverage in your life, the higher level that you can live at. Of course, you can get leverage on yourself. So you say, oh, I want to start working out. I want to lose 20 to 50 pounds and get in shape. Well, a lot of people, they don't have a lot of leverage on themselves. But let's say you're somebody who's just an average American, and you were to go put $10,000 in an escrow, and if you didn't hit that goal in 3 or 4 months, that $10,000 would be donated to somebody else, or maybe even an organization that you don't like. That's leverage, baby. And as it turns out, you would probably hit that goal because you're like, dude, that's $10,000. Like, I could buy a used car for that. Maybe, who knows with inflation. But leverage. And so this is important because as you're thinking and going through life, when you start to look for opportunities in general, then you start looking for opportunities that have higher leverage, opportunities where you can have a tiny input and get a massive output. So here's another way to think about this. The original example I gave with my book. Well, on one hand, it seems like that's a massive undertaking. That's a massive input, Kaylin. What are you talking about? Yeah, it was. It was a lot of work. But what about the output that I get on the other side of that? Well, first of all, anytime you write a book, now, hopefully you have some authority on the subject before you write it. But I guarantee you the process of writing it will solidify that authority. It will solidify that expertise because you can't go through that entire process without actually learning and knowing the stuff that you're writing about. You just can't do it. It's near impossible unless you want to use ChatGPT or something like that. And I didn't use ChatGPT at all in this book. So where that is important actually is, yeah, I had some work to get the book done, but look at the other side. I get to sell this thing over and over and over again. And then it also works to help people understand what I'm about, what I'm offering. It gets people results that are in excess proportion to the amount that they pay for the book. They pay 15, 20, 25 bucks, depending on what version you get, hardcover or not. And it helps people potentially 10x their life. That's massively different, especially if you're in a performance-based industry. And let's just say that you're making $100,000 a year. Well, you read this book, it helps you get clear on what you want. It helps you understand the constraints that you're operating in. It helps you actually adopt a different, more empowered identity. And within 12 months, you could go from making $100,000 a year to $500,000 or $1 million a year, depending on the vehicle that you're in. Maybe you make some pivots, maybe you don't. So then, of course, those people are going to come back and say, hey, you've already demonstrated that you know what you're talking about. You've already demonstrated that you have a capacity to help me in a certain way. Can you help me again in another way? And so they go further and further through the ascension ladder until, of course, either I run out of value or they supersede that, which, I mean, that's the goal of any good coach, is that for their, whoever they're coaching to actually exceed where they're at. Think about Tony Robbins and Jim Rohn. I mean, Jim Rohn, man, he's awesome. He's great. But Tony Robbins surpassed him, man, by far. I mean, Tony Robbins just blew him out of the water. And that's what anybody wants to see. You did a great job if that's the thing. If you delivered that sort of value, I mean, what an impact. What a legacy. What a meaning to have to be able to impact it and influence people in that way. So what I want to open your mind to tonight is that you may be leaving things on the table. You may be leaving things on the table by not properly identifying where you could be creating intellectual property, where you could be creating assets that are one-time investments that can possibly and potentially make you money while you're sleeping. So this isn't really, so my Instagram and social media is filled with all sorts of motivation and sales training and marketing and all sorts of great stuff. And I see a lot of guys out there and they're like, bro, just sell, right? And while in one sense, that's true. In another sense, maybe not. So I'll give you an example. Russell Brunson is a great example. Now, I'm sure he's done plenty of one-to-one sales, phone call sales, closing people. But what he excelled at was actually making funnels, creating marketing that just drove so many leads that he got an insane amount of customers. So that's acquisition. So if you're a salesperson, you can be the best salesperson in the world, but if you don't have leads, then very quickly that role turns into marketing. So there's a saying out there that if you're selling, it's because you failed at marketing. And if you're marketing, it's because you failed at making a good enough product. And if you have a product that's that good, then it'll almost sell itself. Think about Apple. Apple is a phenomenal example of this. If they turned off all of their marketing tomorrow, sales would still pour in, guys. They'd still pour in. Why? Because I tell people, I love my iPhone. I love my computer. I love my Apple products. And I'm going to keep buying them as long as Apple keeps innovating and holding the standard that they have. And so they've created a product. And yes, in that product, it requires continual innovation, continual updating, and all of that. But they built a brand, and that's who they are. And so that intellectual property is not going anywhere. Now, how do we tie this back to you in your life? Potentially. So if you're someone out there and you're like, yeah, Caitlin, this is great, but how does this apply to me? Well, it applies to you because I think a lot of small business owners are leaving things on the table when they fail to create systems or processes, intellectual property of ways that they're doing things that they could create once and then sell repeatedly. So let's just say that you own a small, we'll just say nail salon. Well, if you'll take the time to solve every single problem that you have in that nail salon, you want to have a great offer first. So you create an offer that sets you apart from all the other nail salons in town. And so you differentiate yourself. You decommoditize yourself compared to all the other nail salons. Now you don't necessarily have to compete against them. Yes, you're doing nails, but when people go to you, they can't get what you sell from anybody else in town. And maybe that involves gift cards. Maybe that involves a rewards program. Maybe that involves a monthly membership. Maybe that involves a certain level of customer service. Maybe that involves, there's all sorts of factors. And I have no idea about nail salons. I just picked it out of the blue. I'm totally unfamiliar with how they operate. So, but I'm just kind of going through here so you can see potentially how this may impact or apply to you. So you make an offer and you work to differentiate yourself. Well, how else can you differentiate yourself? That's part of doing the upfront work to create something that is unique behind you. That's unique intellectual property or some other process that's unique to you. And then you take that and you're like, okay, well, I got to get acquisition. I need customers. I need clients, right? And so you create a process behind that. But once you create the process, chances are you can use that process repeatedly over and over and over again. So let's just say that you have some sort of software like ClickFunnels or one of those. And you're like, okay, this seems like a lot of work to set up front. Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it is a lot of work to learn how to build your landing pages and funnels and follow-ups and workflows and email sequences. But once you've built it out, then you can just run that over and over and over again. And even while you're sleeping, you can run ads out there if you have a good enough offer that you can spend $1,000 a month in ads and you can get back $2,000 or whatever it may be for nail salons, depending on your unique positioning and how you package it. Well, then you're basically getting paid to advertise. And you can take that unique process and you can just run it in the background. And now you're making money while you sleep. You're not having to necessarily go out there and cold call people or reach out to your friends, family, whoever, and be like, hey man, I got this nail salon. And know anybody who needs their nails done? And when you're young, when you're first starting off, you probably can't do this. You probably don't have the latitude, but that's part of impulse control. The longer that you can forestall the ask, the longer that you can forestall the result of what you're doing, the bigger thing that you can build. Now, you have to know that what you're selling is good. And how do you know? Oftentimes, that's based upon feedback. But if you've already been in the industry for a while, if you already have some sort of expertise, then you probably have a decent idea of what that looks like. You probably have a pretty good idea. And you can go ahead and you can start building these things. And so this is what I see a lot of business owners today, that they're leaving chips on the table because they're so caught up in the day-to-day minutia that they don't take the time to put the systems in place that would then basically sell while they're sleeping. And then, of course, maybe you wake up and maybe you need to, if it's higher ticket, maybe you need to have a closing conversation on the phone. Well, again, create your sales scripts once. You got to do it good. Of course, that's an iterative process. But once you get the basic outline, those things are probably good for the next 5 to 10 years. Well, it's a little bit of upfront work, but what you get on the back end of that is you can create once and use an infinite number of times. And so that's the value of creating something once and being able to sell it an infinite number of times. And I think a lot of people out there are just wanting simple systems, simple things where they want it done for them. They want it done fast. They're not willing to do the work that it takes in order to create something of value so that they can then sell that repeatedly. And of course, when it's good enough, you'll get referrals repeatedly from that process. So where am I going with this? If you'll take the time and you'll lengthen your time horizon, if rather than focusing so much on next week or next month, you'll focus on next year or 3 years from now, and you'll say, okay, if I'm going to be in this for the next 5 years, maybe 10 years, well, what are the things that I could do in the next 2 years that over the next 8 years would be automated? Because technology allows us this phenomenal ability to automate so much stuff. And it's work. It's work up front, guys. But once you nail that work, once you get it done, then you can repackage it. You can take it out there. And again, you can take everything that you work for and then you can sell it again. And so I'm a big fan of this business model. And well, I have multiple business models, but for anybody who's out there who owns a small business, who's an entrepreneur, who's thinking about being an entrepreneur, who has a degree of expertise, maybe you don't even have a degree of expertise yet, and you're asking yourself, how do I get freedom? How do I gain the freedom of time, of money? How do I get the wealth that I want? How do I have the relationships that I want? Well, part of that first process is to decouple yourself. Part of that first process is to decouple yourself from living in scarcity, from these beliefs that you're never going to break free. You have to project out into the future and say, what is it going to take for you to break free? What is it going to take? What's the amount of work? And then, of course, you have to look and say, am I willing to make the sacrifices? Am I willing to maybe actually step back and lose a little bit of money for a while? Am I willing to cut that income so that I can put the infrastructure in place so that I can grow massively and rapidly in a way that's congruent with what I want, so that I'm not having to spend hours a day calling on the phone or doing things that maybe you don't like to do. And instead, you can spend the majority of your time doing the things that you're really good at and you're best positioned to do. And oftentimes, it takes a little bit of work to get there. It takes a little bit of work to learn how to package and position yourself in the market. It takes a little bit of work to learn how to bring these things to market, to make a really good offer, to build something that's really good, that's meaningful, that people want. But that's okay. That's part of the process. So, hey, what's going on, Lewis? So that's part of that process as far as creating something and then being able to resell it over and over and over again. So if you can exercise impulse control, if you can exercise a degree of authority over yourself, then you can get what we first talked about at the start of the conversation: leverage. part of leverage is being able to put the systems in place that become automated. Yes, it's upfront work, but once you get that upfront work out of the way, it can run in the background and you can make mailbox money. So there's a lot of people online who are like, oh, I just want passive income. I want passive income. I'm going to invest in real estate and, I'm going to, sorry guys. Sometimes after I work out, I get a little airy. And everybody wants passive income. They're like, I don't want to do much for it. And it's like, yeah, that's great. I like that. That sounds good. Let's have more of that. But that doesn't always come super easy. And of course you can do it through real estate. You can do it multiple ways. But one of the lowest hanging fruit ways to simply do that is to actually create the intellectual property, to create the assets, to create the systems that allow you to have cash flow and then actually allow you to have increased cash flow through that automation so that you can have tiny inputs and then get really large outputs on the back end. And so on the front end, what does that look like? Like writing a book. It's like, wow, this is a massive investment. I can't believe this. This is going to take so much work. But then when you think about the fact that you can be out there selling that thing for the next 10 or 20 or 50 years, depending on the level of quality that you produce, it doesn't seem like that big of an investment. I'll give you another example. There's a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy, written by Dr. Glover. And man, I couldn't tell you when that book came out, but of course I'm on his email list, and the book's a phenomenal read, by the way, for any man out there. And woman, actually. I think it really helps a lot of women understand their men a lot better. And it's a wonderful read. It's fantastically done. And he has masterminds and classes and digital courses and all of this stuff surrounding that one book that came out years ago, guys, years. And so he lives down in Puerto Vallarta in Mexico. I think he has maybe a wife or a girlfriend down there, probably younger and whatever else. And he's living the dream. He's got time freedom. He's got all of these things because he did a little bit of work. And so, yeah, that took him a little bit. That took some work. But on the back end, look at what he got. I'll give you another example. A coach of mine, Coach Michael Burt, he's based out of Nashville. And he created this system, Monster Producer. It's his Monster Producer system. And I don't know how much he sells it for on his website. When I was looking, it was like 2 years ago or something. It was like $3,000 or $5,000 or, a pretty good amount. And he advertises it. He's like, there's 146 videos or whatever. And I don't know how many there are. It's been forever since I looked at it. But he took the time to develop his systems. He took the time to create his intellectual property. And through that, even to this day, years later, after he's created it, he'll do events and he'll do summits and he'll do virtual events. And part of his virtual events on almost all the back ends that I've seen, what does he do? He'll have a high ticket offer for people. And along with that high ticket offer, you'll get access to a year's worth of his Monster Producer program. And of course, that's, like a $5,000 value. Why does that matter? Well, if you're selling something that's $10,000 and it's like, hey, you're going to hop in this program for the next 12 weeks. I'm going to coach you, in a group setting with you and 10 other people or 15 other people that are in that setting. It's like, okay, well, what's the value of that? Well, maybe that value right there is $1,000 a week, so $12,000. But on top of that, you're going to get access to the Monster Producer program, maybe valued at $5,000 or $6,000. We'll say $6,000, right? So now you've got a total value of $18,000. Package a few more things in there, and you've got a total value of $25,000. Well, and then today and today only, he's going to sell it for $8,000. Why? Why can he do that? Well, because he incurs no extra work to sell that system. It's already made. He's already made it and he can sell it over and over and over again. And the only extra work that he has to do is that 12 weeks of coaching. And so he's got a lot of leverage there. So we come back to that leverage thing. So anyways, guys, I just wanted to give a few examples here and emphasize that if you're somebody out there and you're wondering and you're stuck in the rat race, or you're stuck in one of these positions where every single day it's like if you stop doing what you're doing, everything's going to dry up, then I would just encourage you to take a look at how easy it is to create intellectual property, at how easy it is to create things that you can make now and then you can sell to infinity. And if you start looking at the world that way, you realize you don't need $250,000 to start investing. You don't need this crazy amount of capital to start going. You don't have to be in real estate to get mailbox money. What you can do is you can create something today, start selling it tomorrow, and be selling it 5 years from now, depending on the industry, of course. So if you're in an industry that's rapidly evolving and is changing, and you're trying to sell something that's based solely off of the most up-to-date thing, yeah, you're going to need to update that. And chances are you're going to want to take a different approach. You're going to want to create some sort of community or mastermind or some ongoing continuity program around that. But if you have something that's timeless, like the things in my book, they're timeless. They've been around for thousands of years, and they're going to be around for thousands more years. And that's part of it. But look, we're humans. You know, nobody teaches us how to work this thing up here between our ears. And so once you learn that, you can do big things. And so that's one of the reasons why I chose to write that book. Of course, it's part of my own story. It's part of the process that I went through myself in order to get the transformation that I have. And the principles are timeless, though. They're not going out of vogue. They can't go out of vogue. We don't adapt fast enough as humans. It's basic, it's basic humanity. And so these are just principles and fundamentals that aren't going anywhere. And so I can sell this book 10 years from now and it'll be as good as yesterday. So I hope that helps anybody out there who's thinking about creating things or on the fence and maybe wondering how you can get some leverage on your life, how you can start building something today that builds cumulatively so that 5 years from now, you haven't just done a bunch of work, you haven't closed a bunch of clients, but if you stop doing that grind, you go to zero, or maybe you switch positions or go to a different company or whatever, you go to zero. Instead, you work on building things that can compound over time. If you look at Russell Brunson, going back to him again, if you hop into any of his funnels, if you hop into any of his different programs, he'll have, here's the 5 free bonuses that you get for any single thing. And it's brilliant. But why can he do that? Well, he's built those things over time. And so he can sell them over and over and over again and not incur any extra cost, any extra work, any extra friction in his life, but you get additional value from that. He can sell a webinar or a presentation that he gave on stage 5 years ago, and he can still sell it today just as well because it's just as relevant, especially in the specific funnel that he's selling it with. And so when you start looking at the world this way and you start building those assets and you start building your repository of IP, intellectual property, then it's easy to start getting some results. And all of that builds so that 2 years from now or 5 years from now, at whatever point, what happens is you reach a sort of escape velocity. So in the front, it seems like a lot of work. When you're first starting off, it seems like this massive uphill battle. But once you reach a sort of escape velocity, it just works, man. It just rolls. You're not having to create a bunch of new stuff all the time. And by that point, creating new stuff is so easy because you've gotten so good at it, you can just roll stuff out, no problem. So that's just my 2 cents. I'll probably close it up here. It's late here. And yeah, so appreciate anybody who hops on, appreciate anybody who listens to this afterwards. Doing these lives is fun for me. I've just started it, working to get better, and I'll be bringing more out there. So hope everybody has a great Tuesday night. Let's keep crushing this week and be great.